Abby.
Our first reading comes from Ecclesiastes chapter 11, verses 1 through 6. Ship your grain across the sea. After many days, you may receive a return. Invest in 7 ventures, yes, in 8. You do not know what disaster may come upon the land. If clouds are full of water, they pour rain on the earth. Whether a tree falls to the south or to the north, in the place where it falls, there it will lie. Whoever watches the wind will not plant. Whoever looks at the clouds will not reap. As you do not know the path of the wind or how the body is formed in a mother's womb, so you cannot understand the work of God, the maker of all things. Sow your seed in the morning, and at evening let your hands not be idle, for you do not know which will succeed, whether this or that, or whether both will do equally well. Thanks be to God for the reading of his word.
Thank you, Abby. Well, we're continuing to talk about parables that Jesus told. I was thinking earlier this week about the one we looked at last week, the wedding feast. Those invited to come in and join the king in the celebration of his son's wedding. And that poor fellow, they got kicked out for not having the right clothes on. And the challenge for us to clothe ourselves, we who name ourselves the children of God and followers of Christ, to clothe ourselves with him. I was thinking of this story. I think it's probably not true, but a lot of people tell it. So there might be some value in it. But it's about Charlemagne, and it's consistent with his character. So maybe it's true in spirit. But the story is told that when he died, he had arranged this bit of drama to unfold. At the end, there was a procession with a carriage and pomp and circumstances as his body was moved to the cathedral at Aix. And when he got there, the bishop cried out and said, "Who comes?" And Charlemagne's page, with a loud voice, said, "Charlemagne, Lord and King of the Holy Roman Empire." And the bishop said, "I know him not." "Who comes?" And again the herald replied. He said, "Charles the Great, a good and an honest man of earth." And the bishop said, "Sorry, don't know him. Who comes?" And the third time, the herald replied, "Charles, a lowly sinner who begs the gift of Christ." To which the bishop said, "Enter, receive Christ's gift of life." Well, that's true or not, in terms of, let me say it this way, historic or not. It's a true thing that we come to Christ's presence not because of what we deserve, but by his welcome. Well, today's parable, just like that one, is similar. Jesus told a lot of parables, and sometimes he told them to the people that were eager to follow him, to make things more accessible. Sometimes he told them, and quite often, as a way of provoking or instructing, rebuking the people who thought they knew what was going on, the religious leaders of the day. And just like last week's, this parable comes with a bit of a warning. You see, these religious leaders, they thought they knew what was going on. They thought who was in and who was out. They thought they knew the way that they could please God and manipulate the heavens and advance their situation on earth through behaving properly. And in that, they missed the whole point. Principally, they missed the depth of what God was about, and they missed the breadth of it. The depth of it they missed because they thought they could just do things on a surface level, add little behaviors, change their language, avoid eating certain foods or dress a certain way, and that would settle the matter. And they didn't realize God was about radically transforming hearts and lives from the ground up. And they also missed the breadth. They thought it was about God's people of Israel only. They didn't remember that Israel was to be a blessing to the whole world. Every family under heaven was to be blessed. They'd forgotten that. So today we come to another one of these stories. And we see what Jesus has to say. I invite you to follow along. It comes from Matthew 25, towards the end of the first book of the New Testament. Again, Jesus talking to those around him. Again, the kingdom of God will be like a man going on a journey, who called his servants, and he entrusted his wealth to them. He gave one 5 bags of gold, and another 2 bags, and to another 1 bag, each according to their ability. Then he went on his journey. And the man who had received 5 bags of gold went at once, and he put his money to work, and he gained 5 bags more. And so also the one who had 2 bags of gold gained 2 more. But the man who had received 1 bag, he went off, dug a hole in the ground, hid his master's money. Now after a long time, the master of those servants returned, and he wanted to settle accounts with them. The man who had received 5 bags of gold brought the other 5. He said, "Master, you entrusted me with 5 bags of gold, and see, I've gained 5 more. And the master replied, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful with few things, and I will put you in charge of many things. So come and share your master's joy." And then the man with 2 bags of gold also came. "Master, you entrusted me with 2 bags of gold, and I've gained 2 more. And the master replied, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful with a few things, so I will put you in charge of many. Come and share your master's joy." And then the one who had received 1 bag of gold came. "Master," he said, "I know that you're a hard man, investing where you've not sown, gathering where you've not scattered seed. And so I was afraid, and I went out and I hid your gold in the ground. So here it is. Here's what belongs to you." And his master said, "You wicked and lazy servant. So you knew that I harvest where I have not sown, and I gather where I have not scattered? Well, then you should have put my money on deposit with the bankers at least, so that when I returned I would have received it back with interest." And then he said to his other servants, "Take this bag of gold from him and give it to the one who has 10 bags. For whoever has will be given more, and they will have an abundance. But whoever does not have, even what they have will be taken from them. And throw the worthless servant outside into darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." Oh, another hard end to this. That's a hard one. I have to say, this is a lot of parables I kind of navigate and think, okay, there's some good stuff to learn here. I read this one, sometimes I quake in my boots. I think, what am I sitting on? What have I buried? Well, there are 4 elements here, at least 4. And there's being entrusted with something. And then there's the charge to make use of it, to invest it, to be a steward of it. Then there's the paying of account, settling accounts, it said in the passage. And finally, there's the reaping of the consequence, of the reward, good or bad. So let's walk through those 4 things, just as his original audience would have heard it. And what was he saying? Why was he talking to them about this stuff? And what corresponds to what? Well, one is this first thing, that the nation of Israel, especially the religious leaders of the nation, were entrusted with something. They had been entrusted with something. It was their whole Jewish identity, going all the way back to Father Abraham. Do you remember in Genesis when Abraham was called? And he's given a covenant. And God says, "Listen, I'm going to make you a great nation. I will make your offspring so plentiful, they'll be like the stars in the heaven or the sand of sea on the shore. You can't count them. More than that, I'm going to make you a blessing. And you will be blessed so that all nations will be blessed through you." And he repeats this multiple times. We read in Genesis 12, Genesis 18, "Abraham shall surely become a great and a mighty nation, and the nations, all the nations of the earth, will be blessed through him." God is saying, this is how I have chosen to deliver the goods of my presence and blessing to all of the earth. In the New Testament, it picks up on this. Paul is saying, "Oh, you guys, us who are not of Jewish descent," says, "you Gentiles, understand that those who have faith, just faith in Christ, you too are the children of Abraham. For God foresaw that the Gentiles would be justified by faith, and so announced the gospel to Abraham in advance. All nations will be blessed through you. So those who rely on faith are blessed along with Abraham. We're caught up. We're part of that. Well, they seem to have missed that part. They seem to have thought that God's picking out of one people was for the sake just of that one people. And they forgot. They forgot to allow that blessing to flow or even to be a blessing. And secondly, that the things we're entrusted with are to be invested, and investment always includes risk. There's always risk. And God's early people, original people, they didn't want risk, just like all of us. When they left slavery in Egypt, along the way they encounter hardship, and what do they say? We should be back in slavery. At least we knew what to predict. We knew where dinner was coming from. That was better back there than this thing of freedom we have. They didn't want it. They didn't think God would provide. And even when they got to the Holy Land, God's provided them with means to live a prosperous life, both in the natural resources that were there, and the rules for governing their common life together. He said, follow this way and it will lead to flourishing. But they didn't want to try. It seemed too risky. God said crazy things, like let your land lie fallow every 7 years. Don't farm. They're like, oh, you're talking nonsense. We got to make hay while the sun shines. We're not going to let that land lie fallow. And what happens? Well, they get kicked off the land so it can have its rest. The Babylonians come and take them away. The Assyrians come and punish them. They want a king later on. They say, look, when we look at the nations around us, they have kings and we want a king because that seems safer to us. And God says, if you have a king, some bad things are going to go down, but if you want one, you can have it. But they were afraid. They didn't want to risk being different. They loved the wrong things. They feared the wrong things. They worshiped the wrong things. They placed their hopes in the wrong things, all because they thought a different way looked more secure. We can do that too. Trusting God seemed like too big of a gamble. So they failed to follow his instructions, and they suffered the consequence over and over again. They would disobey. God would send a neighboring country to punish them and bring them to line. They would wake up after a couple generations and say, oh, actually, we had a good thing going. And someone would read the law again, and they'd renew worship practices and pledge themselves to live right, and God would intervene and deliver them, and they'd have a start over until subsequent generations forgot. They didn't want to risk. Well, that they had to pay account. They did pay account. If you read the whole Old Testament, it's a cycle of that blessing and obedience, followed by neglect and forgetfulness, followed by outright rebellion, followed by some kind of occupation or exile punishment, followed by repentance, and then renewal over and over. It happens in big cycles of history for Israel. It can happen in the small cycles of our own life. So they deprived themselves of the joy that God intended them to know. And they also deprived other people of the joy that they had to share. And now here in Jesus' day, the cycle's being repeated. The contemporary folks, they received the good news from John the Baptist, called them to repent. Look, the kingdom is here. We got another shot right now to live in God's blessing through his kingdom. It's at hand. And what did they do to John the Baptist? He was thrown in prison and beheaded. And Jesus comes announcing the good news. And what do they do about him? Well, they intend to silence and then ultimately kill him. He's saying, oh, you guys, you've been given so much, and you've misunderstood it, and you haven't used it well. And so not only is it not a blessing to you, but it's not a blessing to others, and you're missing the point. Jesus never gives parables like this in a way that says it's too late. He does say things in a way that suggests someday it might be too late to make decisions again. So live well. Wake up. See what you've got. Do something about it. Let me give you, before I apply it more directly to our own life, let me lift up an illustration. A woman who was a mother, probably a mother you'd never heard of. And she was symbolically a mother to many. In fact, Martin Luther King called her the mother of the movement. That is the mother of the civil rights movement. Her name was Septima Poinsetta Clark. Anyone know that name? No. Yeah, she doesn't get a lot of recognition. Let me tell you about her. She was born in Charleston, South Carolina in 1898. Her father lived most of his life in slavery until he was liberated. Her mom grew up in Haiti. Her dad worked as a janitor after he was done being a slave. He never learned to write. He couldn't write his own name until very late in life. His mother worked as a launderer. She grew up with very poor conditions in the segregated South. Jim Crow laws made daily life kind of a burden in many ways. But her mom and dad prioritized education, and Septima had a bright mind. And so they took advantage of what education opportunities they had, which for the first few years was a school for black children. She didn't learn a whole lot there, so her mom pulled her out and sent her under the charge of a woman across the street who was sharp and was teaching some of the neighborhood kids. Her mom did laundry for her and chores in exchange for Septima to get an education. Well, because of her mom's industry and saving, by the time she was high school age, she was able to go to a little private school for black children, high school, Avery Normal Institute. And she studied and learned hard, and she graduated in 1916. Finished, and she didn't have any money to go to college, but she could become a teacher of other black kids. So she went to John's Island, in a very impoverished little place, and there she began to teach. During those early adult years, she also suffered some other things. She married a guy named Neary Clark, and she conceived, had a little girl who died in her second week of life, which was a great grief to Septima. They had another little son, Neary Jr., and then when he was just 5 years old, Dad died. Her husband died, and she was left raising this little guy on her own. She remarried another guy who proved not to be a very trustworthy fellow, and he died young too. And she was raising her own. By the time her young Neary was about 12 or 13, she was working hard, but she just could not afford to care for both her and him. So he went to live with his grandparents away from home. She would teach children during the day, but she also saw this was a profound need for teaching adults. So in the evening, she would teach adults how to read. And she was pretty creative at it. She used everyday kind of resources and materials. This is what she writes. She said, I had to use what they had. They didn't have textbooks. I used catalogs from Sears and Roebuck. I used labels on the cans of food. I used price tags from the store. We used all those things to teach folks how to read and how to count. And she says, I just thought you had to take what you had and make what you wanted. And so she learned how to teach. Well, her experience in teaching adult literacy also got her involved in a little bit of politics. Because she saw at the time in South Carolina, black women could not teach in the public schools, even black children. And the schools are segregated, but even the black schools had to have white teachers. And she thought, this doesn't right. So she started working with NAACP, and over time, they changed that. Soon she found herself in a position where she could teach black children through the public schools, and she began to do that. But she also noticed that things still were not quite fair. She heard black school was across the street from a school for white kids, and she and one other teacher were in charge of 32 children. She was the principal, and she made $35 a week, and her other teacher made $25 a week. Now, across the street at the white school, there was one teacher with 3 children, and she made $85 a week. Septim said, this just isn't right. I don't even have enough to raise my own child. He's off with his grandparents. This is not right. So she began to advocate through that with the NAACP and some Teachers Association there. Slowly things began to change and increase. But she worked that way, teaching kids in the day and adults in the night for a long, long while, 40-some years. And then the state of South Carolina in 1956 passed a law that said if you work in any type of public service, you cannot be involved with any civil rights organizations. Because why would someone working for the government be interested in civil rights? So it must be a conflict of interest. And she said, well, I'm not going to give that up. And so they said, then give up your job. So after 56 years of working, or she was 56 years old, 40 years of working. She'd started at 16 teaching. She gave up 40 years of pension in a position that she loved. She had some friends up at the Highlander School in Tennessee. And she went there, Miles Horton and Martin Luther King. And together, she sold them on an idea. She told them about how she had been teaching adults how to read, and she thought that was pretty important for their efforts to change some things. So together they launched citizenship schools. And it was a simple thing. Teach adults how to read and write so that they can participate in civics. So over the next few years, 10 years or so, they launched 800 schools by using local folks all across the South, local teachers, taught them how to teach adult literacy, taught them how to fill out voter registration forms for those folks, help those folks do it themselves. So they had 800 schools, 10,000 people were trained to be teachers. And over the course of a decade, they had at least 700,000 adults go through the program to learn basic skills so that they could participate as citizens in the towns and the states and the country they belong to. It's pretty amazing. In a 10-year period, the registration rate of black voters went from 5% to 50%. 5% to 50%. That's pretty amazing. And she fought the entire way. In fact, even folks within the civil rights movement, men, I could name some names, who often looked at her and said, what is she doing here? What's Septima doing here? We're about serious business. We're marching in Washington. We're changing legislation. And she'd say, yeah, you need top-down stuff. We do need to change the laws. But changed laws won't result in changed lives unless you do bottom-up stuff and empower people to take advantage of what is theirs legally. And it's true. That's the only way. Sociologists will tell you this. Historians will say it's true. Real social change happens with a combination of top-down structures and legislation and bottom-up movement of empowered lives. Well, she had lost a lot, suffered a lot, and she did what she could. She said, I believe if you can read, then you can teach. And if you can teach, you can change the world. And she died in 1987. That was the first year of college for me. Martin Luther King understood how deeply the movement here in the U.S. was indebted to Septima. So when he went to receive a Peace Prize over in Sweden, who did he take with him? The mother of the movement. Septa McClar. It's pretty beautiful. She said, I am not a woman who's looking for a fight, but I am a woman looking for a way to use what I have to make life better for those who come behind me. Now I read that, I think, oh, Greg, you're such a slouch. What are you doing? But I'm sure she's one who's received into the kingdom with these words, well done, good and faithful servant. You were faithful with few things, and you're going to be put in charge of many. Come and enter my joy. Well, what about us? What does it mean for us? I want to take these elements of this story backwards. You know, we've been talking about being entrusted with something, being charged to invest it, which includes risk, and then having to pay account and receive the award for what's there. So let's start backwards. Paying account and reaping a reward. Truth is, the time is coming when all of our choosing is over. The capacities and abilities that we have will evaporate and be gone. For some of us, that will happen in the twinkling of an eye. For others, it might be a long and slow degrading process, but it comes when choosing is over. You know, it's interesting that the reward, did you notice the reward that was given to those first two servants? It was more work. It was the opportunity to enter into the master's joy of continuing to do good and creative stuff. He didn't say, oh, well done, now take your ease. No, he said, you've been faithful a little, I'm going to entrust you with a lot. And together we're going to have fun doing some great stuff. That is a joyful kind of thing, you know. It's meaningful and celebratory. You know, just like last week's thing about the wedding feast. It's all part of this kingdom. There's work to do, good things to do. It's all part of the master's joy and time to celebrate. And a day will come when we will reap what we have sown. Will get to us what we got coming. You know, and that is going to involve risk. That third servant, I feel that of all the characters in Scripture, this is one that it disturbs me the most. Wicked and lazy servant. Now, I want you to know, when this guy went and buried his gold, I used to think that was kind of a joke. It's like, oh, he's so stupid, he doesn't know what to do with it, so he put it in the ground. You remember I mentioned this a couple of weeks ago that burying valuables was a pretty common practice. That's why you get hoard. There's people are still discovering all over the British Isles and other places these little hoards of coins and stuff. Because if you had something really valuable, there weren't many safes. There weren't banks. You put it in the safest place you knew, which was a hiding place. And that's what he did. He said, I'm going to play it safe. I'm going to play it safe. He's a hard man. He harvests where he doesn't sow. Reaps where he hasn't put seed in the ground. So I'm going to make sure I don't lose a cent. I'm going to keep this safe. Safest place I know, just like everyone would have thought at the same time, put it in the ground. Well, yeah, it's sad. Our job is not to keep things safe. Those who want to hold their life, who keep their life, lose it. Job's not to keep it safe, but to let it grow, to help all of creation realize its potential, the people around us to flourish. You know, when I look at this congregation, I see the creativity in the industry and the faithfulness and productivity and volunteer service and leadership. So many folks making a difference in their little circles here in our congregation, but in their homes and in their communities and their workplaces. It's a beautiful thing. But sometimes the fear of risk, though, can keep us from acting. What if it doesn't turn out right? What if I fail? What if I look foolish? What if I'm proved wrong in the end? You know, back in Exodus when The Israelites were out of slavery, out of Egypt. It was time to go enter the promised land, and they sent in the spies. Do you remember what the spies said? 10 of them, all but Joshua and Caleb. 10 of them came back and said, we look like grasshoppers in our own eyes. Those people are giants. There's no way we can enter that place. And it's interesting that they revealed the problem with their own vision. We feel like grasshoppers to ourselves. And that makes us think there's no way we can receive this good gift. Well, they were so afraid to risk that God had to wait for a next generation that would be more courageous to enter the land. I love this quote from Helen Keller. She says this: security, it's mostly a superstition. It does not exist in nature, nor do the children of men as a whole experience it. Avoiding danger is no safer in the long run than outright exposure. For life is either a daring adventure or nothing at all. Life is either a daring adventure or nothing at all. She blows the lid off that notion, that illusion of security. It doesn't really exist in nature. And in the long run, the risk is there anyhow. So daring adventure or nothing at all. When I live in such a way that I allow the fear of risk to keep me from acting, I'm no better than that third servant's gold. Because frankly, the only people who don't know risk are like that gold buried in the ground. That's the only place there's no more risk. So someday we'll have to pay account. We'll reap what's coming. We can't avoid taking risks as long as we're alive. That brings us to the starting point, which is this: having been entrusted with something. And the question is, what? What have you got? What have you got? What have I got? What have we together got? What has God entrusted to us? What's your bag of gold, if you will? Here's a good practice. It's a good one. It ought to be done regularly. I ought to do it more often than I do. But it's to take an inventory of my allotment. What has been allotted to me? And can I name it? Do I know what it is? I can't use it wisely unless I can name it. Septima, she knew. She named what she could do. I can read. And if I can read, I can teach. And if I can teach, I can change others' lives. And if they change lives, we'll change the world. What have you got? What's the inventory of your allotment? Have eyes to see it. Helen Keller, another beautiful little quote from her was this. She said, "So much has been given to me." Now you remember, this is the woman born deaf and blind. "So much has been given to me, I have no time to ponder what has been denied." Isn't that great? Well, what have you got? In the New Testament, there's that great story of Jesus feeding the 5,000. And Andrew comes, it starts with Andrew saying, well, we got this, 5 loaves and 2 fish. Named it, committed it to God. When Moses was afraid to lead the people out of Israel, God said, Moses, what's that in your hand? What have you got? He said, I got a shepherd's crook. Okay, we're going to use that. And he showed him. Man, I know this. When we have eyes to see what God has put in our hands, what he's entrusted to us, as small as it is, as big as it is, as little, as burdensome or unwanted as it might be, that is the way God will change us and do his purpose. That's the pathway into the celebration with the King's mansion, to enter into his joy. We close with 2 more quotes from Septima Clark. She said, if we wait for the necessary moment for things to be perfect, then we never act. You can't sit down and say, well, what's the use? You have to decide that you're going to do something. And you do it with what you have, not with what you wish you had. And finally, she says this, I have a great belief in the fact that wherever there is a need, there's also divine guidance that helps you meet that need. You don't have to have everything. You just have to have the will to use what you got. Well, may that be true by Christ's grace and the Spirit's power, that we would use each one of us what we've got. Let's stand up and sing. It's number 590. Rise up, O saints of God.